Rain falls sideways on a Portland sidewalk in November. The kind of rain that does not ask permission. The camera pulls in slow, past lobster boats, past shipping cranes that belong to a dead man. 42 floors up, a mahogany table, a small white envelope slides across it, a woman of 74. Thrift store boots still leaking. She has not slept in 3 years. Inside the envelope, $1. The widow smiles. The nephew laughs. The lawyer's hands tighten on the leather folder. The woman does not cry, not yet. In her coat pocket, something heavy, something engraved, something a dying brother spent his last lucid month preparing. And somewhere, a vault door is waiting to be opened. The rain in Portland that November was the kind that did not ask permission. It came sideways. It came in your collar. It came in the seams of your shoes if the seams of your shoes had been walked through too many winters. Cordelia Ainsworth was 74 years old. She did not own an umbrella. She had owned one. Once, a green one. Walter had given it to her the Christmas of 1994. The handle was carved wood. It had her initials on it, C.A., in small brass letters. Walter had been dead for almost 3 decades. The umbrella had broken in 2011. She had not replaced it, because umbrellas were not for women who counted quarters at the laundromat. Umbrellas were for women who took taxis, and Cordelia Ainsworth had not taken a taxi since 1998. So she walked. She walked from the bus stop on Forest Avenue, 6 blocks, in the rain, to the glass front doors of Pemberton, Mallory, and Hale attorneys at law. 42nd floor of the tallest building Portland had to offer, which was not very tall by Boston standards, but tall enough to make a woman with 74-year-old knees stop in the lobby, pretend to read a directory, and catch her breath. She caught her breath. She looked down. Her thrift store boots were leaking. There was a puddle forming on the marble floor beneath her left heel. A young man in a doorman uniform looked at her, then looked at the puddle, then looked at her again. She moved off the marble. She moved onto the entrance mat. She apologized. She did not know why she was apologizing. The elevator was made of glass on 3 sides. She watched Portland get smaller and smaller as she went up. The harbor, the lobster boats, the cranes at the shipping yard, the Marwick Maritime cranes, her brother's cranes, the cranes he had owned, past tense, because Harrison was dead. Harrison Marwick, 79 years old, cancer of the bone, cancer of the mind, cancer of every quiet hope a man with too much money never gets around to spending, dead 3 weeks ago at 3:18 in the morning, in a hospital bed in his own bedroom, holding her hand. She had been the one holding his hand, not his wife, not his nephew. Her. The elevator dinged, 42nd floor. The doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like new carpet and old money. Cordelia stepped out. Her boots squelched. She winced. She walked. The receptionist was 23 years old, or 24. She had the kind of teeth that came from parents who could afford braces. "I'm here for the Marwick reading," Cordelia said. The receptionist did not look up. "Name Cordelia Ainsworth." The young woman tapped at her keyboard, frowned, tapped again. "You're not on the list." Cordelia felt her stomach drop 1 floor, then 2. "My brother, Harrison Marwick. I'm his sister." The young woman tapped again, frowned harder. Then her eyes flicked to a printed memo taped to the side of her monitor. The frown softened into something else, something Cordelia could not read at first. Pity, maybe. "Oh," the receptionist said. "Yes, you're listed under attendees, not beneficiaries. My mistake. Conference room B, down the hall, last door on the left. Attendees, not beneficiaries." Cordelia walked down the hallway. She thought about that word. Attendee. Like a wedding she was watching from the back row. Like a funeral where she did not get to sit with the family. Like she was here to observe, not to receive, not to belong. She pushed open the door to conference room B. And there they were. Vivian Marwick, 44 years old, platinum blonde, wearing a black wool suit that probably cost more than Cordelia's monthly Social Security check, sitting at the far end of the mahogany table, tapping on her phone, bored. Vivian did not look up. Next to her sat Carter Davenport, 32, Harrison's nephew, the son of Harrison's older brother Reuben, who had died of a stroke at 51. Carter was leaning back in his chair, legs crossed, loafers with no socks. In November, in Maine. Carter looked up. He smirked. "Aunt Cordelia," he said. "You made it." She nodded. She did not trust her voice. She sat down at the opposite end of the table, far from them, as far as the table would allow, her handbag in her lap, her hands folded on top of the handbag, her coat still on, because the room was cold, because she was cold, because she had been cold for a long time. August Pemberton entered. He was 68, silver hair combed back, a suit that looked like it had been made by hand, by someone in a small shop, probably in London. He carried a thick leather folder. He sat down at the head of the table. He looked at each of them. 1, 2, 3. His eyes lingered on Cordelia for just a moment. Then he opened the folder. "Thank you all for coming," he said. His voice was low. Sandpaper. Tobacco. The voice of a man who had read 1,000 wills and never gotten used to any of them. Vivian finally put her phone down. Cordelia closed her eyes, and the room dissolved. And she was no longer in the conference room. She was in a hospital corridor. 3 years ago, October 2023. The smell of disinfectant, the hum of fluorescent lights, the plastic chairs that hurt your tailbone, a doctor with kind eyes named Dr. Saoirse Bramwell saying the word Alzheimer's the way you might say the word avalanche. Early onset, Dr. Bramwell had said. Aggressive. We are also seeing markers for metastatic bone cancer. Stage 3, possibly 4. We need more imaging. Harrison had nodded. He had not cried. Harrison Marwick did not cry. He had never cried. Not when their mother Maisie died in 1965. Not when their father went the next year. Not at Walter's funeral. Not when his first marriage collapsed in 1998 in a courthouse on Federal Street. He had nodded. He had stood up. He had said, "Thank you, doctor." He had walked out of the office, and he had walked past Cordelia in the hallway, without seeing her, because they had not spoken in 15 years. 15 years. Since 2008. Since the argument about their mother's headstone, about who was paying for the upkeep, about who had forgotten the anniversary, about things so small that 15 years later, neither one of them could remember what the actual argument was about. Only that the argument had happened. Only that the silence had grown. Only that Cordelia had stopped calling. And Harrison had never called back. She had only come to the hospital that day because his secretary, a woman named Marlena, had phoned the library where Cordelia used to work. Marlena had tracked her down. Marlena had said, "Mrs. Ainsworth, your brother needs you. He does not know that he needs you, but he does." So she came, and he walked past her, and she followed him into the parking garage, and she said his name, just once. "Harrison." He stopped walking. He did not turn around. She said, "I came because Marlena called me. Where's Vivian?" A long silence. Then he said Tuscany, and Carter, Aspen. She walked around him so she could see his face. He was 76 years old. He looked 86. His shoulders were narrower than she remembered. His hair was thinner. His eyes were the same gray-blue, like the harbor in February. She said, "Come home with me." He said, "I have a home." She said, "You have a house. It's different." He did not answer. He got into his Bentley. He drove away. 3 days later, Marlena called again. "He needs you," Marlena said. "He won't ask. He never will." but he needs you. So Cordelia packed a suitcase. She turned off the heat in her one-bedroom apartment in South Portland. She locked the door, and she moved into the Marwick estate on Cape Elizabeth. The estate was the size of a small museum. Stone, 3 stories, a round driveway, a fountain that had been turned off for the season, a staff that had been let go 6 months earlier when Harrison decided he wanted privacy. What he had wanted was for nobody to see him forget how to dress himself. What he had wanted was for nobody to see him try to call his dead mother on the kitchen telephone. What he had wanted was for nobody to see him cry the first time he forgot Cordelia's name. But she saw. She saw all of it. For 3 years, she bathed him when he forgot how to use the shower. She cooked him soft foods when the bone cancer in his jaw made chewing impossible. She paid out of her own pension when Vivian's lawyers froze the joint accounts during a preliminary separation that was never finalized. Because Harrison declined too fast, she paid for the morphine, she paid for the diapers. She paid for the night nurses on the night she was so exhausted she could not stand up. She paid until her savings account had $218 in it. And then she paid the night nurses with her credit card. And the credit card maxed out. And the night nurses stopped coming. So she stayed up herself. She read to him. She read Moby Dick, because that was the book they had read together as children. In the summer of 1962, on the porch of the cottage in Booth Bay. He had been 15, she had been 10. He had read aloud and made all the voices. Captain Ahab, Starbuck, Queequeg. He had been a wonderful brother once, a long time ago, before the money, before the empire, before whatever the empire had cost him. She read Moby Dick to him in 2024. She read it in 2025. She read it 3 times all the way through. He listened. Sometimes he did not listen. Sometimes he slept. Sometimes he stared at the ceiling and asked her questions about the wallpaper. There is no wallpaper, she would say. He would close his eyes. In the spring of 2025, Hazel arrived. Hazel Quincy was 29 years old, a hospice nurse. She had been hired by a foundation Cordelia had never heard of. The foundation was called the Eunice Quincy Memorial Trust. Hazel had explained the first day that her grandmother had been a nurse too. Her grandmother had passed. The foundation had funded Hazel's nursing degree. The foundation in exchange sent her to certain cases. This was one of those cases. Cordelia had not asked questions. She had been too tired to ask questions. She had only said, "Thank you for coming." And Hazel had said, "Ma'am, may I make you a cup of tea?" And Cordelia had cried. She had cried for 10 minutes in the kitchen of her dying brother's mansion, while Hazel in her scrubs made her a cup of Earl Grey with 2 sugars and a slice of lemon, the way Walter used to make it. Hazel had not asked why she was crying. Hazel had only set the teacup down, quietly, and said, "Take your time, Mrs. Ainsworth. We have time." Which was a lie. But it was a kind lie, and kind lies were rare enough in November of 2025 that Cordelia treasured it. Hazel stayed for the next 7 months. She helped Cordelia change the sheets. She helped Cordelia turn Harrison when his hip sores got bad. She sang to him in the late hours, old hymns, songs her grandmother had taught her, songs that had no copyright, songs that had outlived the singers. Harrison sometimes hummed along. He could not remember Cordelia's name some days, but he hummed. Vivian came home from Tuscany in June of 2025. She stayed for 48 hours. She brought a photographer. She had her picture taken next to Harrison's hospital bed. She posted 3 pictures on her Instagram. She wrote a caption about the hardest moments of love. She got 87,000 likes. Then she flew back to Tuscany. Carter came home once, in August. He had asked Cordelia for $1,000. Cash. He said his credit card had been frozen at a hotel in Aspen. He said it was an emergency. He said he would pay her back. Cordelia gave him $200 because that was all she had left in her wallet. He took it. He did not pay her back. He left without seeing Harrison. He did not come back until the funeral. Harrison died on October 17th, 2026, 3:18 in the morning. She had been reading Moby Dick. Chapter 42, The Whiteness of the Whale. She had paused mid-sentence because she heard a change in his breathing. The change. The one Hazel had warned her about 3 weeks earlier. Hazel had said, "When the breath changes, ma'am, you'll know it sounds different, like the body is putting things down." So Cordelia put the book down. She took her brother's hand. She said, "Harrison, it's Della, I'm here." He opened his eyes. For 1 second, he looked at her. He saw her. He really saw her. The way he used to see her in 1962 on the porch in Boothbay. The way only a brother can see a sister he has loved his whole life and forgotten how to say so. He squeezed her hand. Once, then he was gone. She sat with him for 2 hours, until Hazel came in at 5, and the conference room came back. And August Pemberton was reading, and he had reached the part Cordelia was supposed to hear. "To my wife Vivian Marwick," August read, "I leave the sum of $14 million, the primary residence on Cape Elizabeth, the summer estate on Mount Desert Island, and the contents of the wine cellar." Vivian did not look up. She nodded once, like a woman accepting a delivery. "To my nephew Carter Davenport," August continued, "I leave my voting shares in Marwick Maritime Industries, estimated current value $9.2 million, along with the vintage automobile collection." Carter slapped the table. Quietly, politely, but still. A slap. He grinned at Vivian. She did not grin back. She tapped her phone. August turned the page. The room became very quiet. August looked up. His eyes met Cordelia's. For just a moment. There was something in them she could not read. Apology, maybe. Or warning. Or both. He looked back down. And finally he said, "To my sister, Cordelia Ainsworth." Cordelia held her breath. She did not know what she was hoping for. She was not hoping for millions. She did not need millions. She needed her credit card paid off. She needed the back rent on her South Portland apartment. She needed the heat to stay on through January. She needed dignity. She needed to be seen. That was all. She just wanted to be seen. "I leave," August read. His voice tightened, just slightly. The way the voice of an honest man tightens when he is required to say a thing he wishes he were not required to say. The contents of the attached envelope. He reached into the back of his folder. He pulled out a small white envelope. Plain, cheap, the kind you bought in packs of 50 at the drugstore. He slid it across the long mahogany table. It traveled. It traveled past Vivian, past Carter, past the polished surface of decades of New England money. It stopped in front of Cordelia. She picked it up. It was light. It was so light. She thought, there must be a check inside. A check folded very small. That is what this is. That has to be what this is. She slid her thumb under the flap. The paper tore. She tipped the envelope. Onto the mahogany table, a single $1 bill fell out, wrinkled, crisp at the edges, the kind of dollar bill that had been sitting in a drawer for a year. With it, a small folded piece of paper, typed, one line. Cordelia unfolded the paper. Her hands were shaking. She read it, out loud. She did not mean to read it out loud, but her mouth moved. "For my sister Cordelia, who always knew the exact value of things." The silence lasted half a second. Then Carter laughed. It was not a small laugh. It was a loud laugh, a theatrical laugh, the kind of laugh designed to be heard, the kind of laugh designed to do damage. He slapped the table again, harder this time. $1, he said. My God, he left her $1. Vivian smiled, slowly, like a cat finishing a meal. "Well, Cordelia," yeah, she said. Her voice was soft, almost kind, which was worse than if she had screamed. I suppose that's about what your bedside manner was worth. Don't spend it all in one place. The MBTA fares have gone up, I hear. Cordelia could not speak. Her ears were ringing. Her vision was narrowing. She thought, I am going to faint. She thought, I am not going to faint. I am going to stand up. I am going to walk out of this room. I am not going to faint in front of these people. I am not going to cry in front of these people. I am not going to give them that. She stood up. Her knees did not buckle. A small miracle. She picked up the dollar bill. She picked up the note. She put them both in her handbag. She did not look at Vivian. She did not look at Carter. She did look, for 1 second, at August Pemberton. He was looking at her. His face was carved out of grief. He opened his mouth. He said, Cordelia. She shook her head. She did not want him to say anything. She did not want anyone to say anything ever again. She walked to the door. She walked out. She did not run. She did not cry. She walked the length of the carpeted hallway, past the receptionist with the good teeth, into the elevator. The elevator made of glass on 3 sides. She watched Portland get bigger and bigger as she went down. The harbor came back. The lobster boats came back. The Marwick maritime cranes came back. She thought about how strange it was that a thing could be enormous and worthless at the same time. The elevator dinged. Lobby. She walked across the marble, past the doorman, through the revolving glass doors, into the rain. The rain had gotten worse. The wind was sideways. She did not have an umbrella. She walked anyway. She walked 1 block, 2 blocks, 3. She did not know where she was going. The bus stop was the other way. She did not care. She kept walking. At the corner of Congress and Pearl, she stopped. She stood under an awning. She let the rain stop hitting her face. And then, finally, she cried. Not loudly, not the way women in movies cry, not the way Vivian would have cried if Vivian had ever cried about anything other than the price of a handbag. She cried quietly. The way a woman who has spent 74 years not making a fuss learns to cry. Almost soundlessly, her shoulders shaking, her breath catching, her hand pressed against her mouth. A man with an umbrella walked past her. He did not look at her. A woman with a stroller walked past her. The woman with the stroller did look at her, briefly, the way old women on street corners are looked at by women with strollers, with a kind of mild pity that is mostly fear. Cordelia did not blame her. She would have been afraid of herself, too. After a while, she wiped her face. She put her hand into the pocket of her coat to find a tissue. She did not have a tissue. She had not had a tissue in her pocket since 1996. But there was something in the pocket, something solid. She pulled it out. It was a fountain pen, heavy, black lacquer, gold trim, a small star at the tip of the cap. The Parker logo. She knew this pen. She knew this pen the way you know the voice of someone you have loved. This was Harrison's pen. He had carried it since 1971. He had bought it at a stationery store in Boston the day he signed the papers to incorporate Marwick Maritime. He had used it for 55 years. He had signed contracts with it, treaties, lease agreements, court documents, the divorce papers from his first wife, the marriage papers to Vivian, the estate planning, the will Cordelia had just sat through. This pen had signed all of it, and it was in her pocket. She had not put it there. She thought back. She thought back hard. She had not been near Harrison's desk this morning. She had not been to the estate at all. She had taken the bus from her apartment. She had not been near anything that belonged to Harrison, except this morning. Just before she left her apartment, Hazel had stopped by. Hazel. Hazel had come over at 7 in the morning with a thermos of coffee to wish Cordelia luck, to say, "You will get through this," to say, "I am sorry I cannot come with you." And Hazel had hugged her, a long hug, the kind a granddaughter gives a grandmother she has known her whole life. even though Cordelia had only known Hazel for 7 months, even though they were not blood. Hazel had hugged her, and Hazel's hand had been in the pocket of Cordelia's coat, just for a moment, just for the moment of the hug. Cordelia had not noticed at the time. She had not noticed because she had been too busy not crying into Hazel's shoulder. But Hazel had put something in her pocket. This pen, Harrison's pen. Cordelia stood under the awning at the corner of Congress and Pearl, the rain coming down, the cars hissing past, the pen in her hand, heavy, real. Why? Why would Hazel have Harrison's pen? Why would Hazel give it to her? Why would Hazel give it to her today? Today of all days. Today after everything. Cordelia turned the pen over. There was an engraving on the side. She had seen it 1,000 times. She had not looked at it closely in decades. The engraving said in tiny letters, H.A.M. Harrison Alistair Marwick. But underneath those letters, there was a second engraving, newer, sharper. The metal still slightly lighter where the engraving tool had bitten in. Recent, done within the last year. Two words and a date. Cordelia leaned closer. She held the pen up to the gray Portland light. She read, 2 words, for Della, and a date. October 15th, 2026. 2 days before Harrison died. Her knees almost went out from under her. She caught the side of the building. She held the pen. She held the pen so tight she could feel the gold trim bite into her palm. She did not understand. She did not understand any of it. She thought, why would he engrave a pen for me and not leave it in the will? Why would he hide it? Why would he give it to a hospice nurse to slip into my pocket? Why? Then she thought, maybe the dollar. Maybe the dollar was not the whole story. She did not know yet. She would not know for 4 more days. 4 days of sitting in her cold apartment, with the heat shut off, with the back rent notice on the kitchen table, with the dollar bill on her coffee table, the note next to it, the pen in her pocket, watching the radiator stay quiet, watching the windows fog from the inside, wondering what kind of man engraves a pen for a sister he has not spoken to in many years, and then leaves her $1 in front of his wife. What kind of man? What kind of brother? What kind of message? She did not know. But somewhere in the part of her chest that had been quiet for a very long time, something old was waking up. Not hope. Not yet. Something quieter than hope. Something more like a question. A question with her name on it. A question her brother Harrison Alistair Marwick had spent the last year of his life building an answer to. She did not know that. She would not know that for 4 more days. But she would know. Soon, she would know. Because in 4 days, a black town car would pull up in front of her building in South Portland. A man in a hand-tailored suit would get out. He would carry a thick leather briefcase. He would knock on her door, and August Pemberton would say to her, "Mrs. Ainsworth, may I come in? There is something you need to see." And the world she thought she lived in would not be the world she lived in anymore. But that was 4 days away. Tonight, the rain, the pen, the dollar, the note, the voice of her dead brother saying, through paper and ink, through gold trim and engraved letters, through a young woman named Hazel who had hugged her at 7 in the morning, for Della. Her brother had called her Della since she was 4 years old. Nobody else had called her that. Nobody else had ever called her that. Not Walter, not the colleagues at the library, not the neighbors, not Vivian, not Carter, only Harrison. Della. She held the pen. She stood in the rain, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself say his name out loud. Harry, she said, just like that, the way she had said it when they were children. Harry, what did you do? The rain did not answer, but the pen in her hand felt warm, as if it had been waiting for a very long time to be opened. 4 days. That is how long Cordelia Ainsworth sat in her apartment in South Portland. 4 days in the same wool cardigan. 4 days drinking the same loose tea brewed 3 times until it tasted like warm rainwater. 4 days with the radiator quiet because the gas had been shut off on the second day. The eviction notice had arrived on the third day, slipped under the door. Yellow paper. 30 days to vacate or pay $742 plus late fees. She had picked it up. She had read it once. She had set it on the kitchen counter, on top of the other yellow papers. There was a stack now, a small one, a neat one. She had always been organized, even in ruin. The dollar bill sat on the coffee table, folded once, lengthwise, the way Harrison used to fold dollar bills when he gave them to her as a child, to tuck into her school books, so she would have lunch money she did not have to ask their mother for. Next to the dollar bill, the note. For my sister Cordelia, who always knew the exact value of things. Next to the note, the pen. The pen with the second engraving. For Della. October 15th, 2026. She had not slept much. She had stared at the 3 objects for 4 days, like a woman waiting for a kettle to whistle, except the kettle was not on the stove. The kettle was in her chest, and it would not whistle. On the morning of the 4th day, she ran out of tea. She sat on the couch in the cold living room, quilt over her knees, Hazel's quilt. Hazel had brought it over the day after the funeral, a handmade quilt. Patchwork, Hazel had said. My grandmother made this. I want you to have it. Cordelia had not understood why a young woman would give her grandmother's quilt to a stranger, but Hazel had insisted, and Cordelia had not had the strength to refuse. So the quilt sat across her knees, warm, heavy, smelling faintly of cedar. She was about to stand up. She was about to walk to the kitchen. She was about to count the change in the bottom of her purse and see if she had enough for a single tea bag at the corner store. When the knock came, 3 sharp raps, the kind of knock a person learns from 40 years of knocking on important doors. She froze, because that was not Hazel's knock. Hazel knocked 4 times, always 4. A little melody. This was 3. Cordelia stood up, slowly. Her knees complained. She walked to the door. She looked through the peephole, and her breath caught. Because standing in the dim, peeling hallway of her low-income building, standing on the linoleum tiles where the super had spilled bleach last month, standing between 2 flickering fluorescent tubes, was August Pemberton, in a charcoal suit, holding a briefcase that probably cost more than her car, if she had still had a car, which she did not, because she had sold it in 2023 to pay for Harrison's first round of off-label medication. She unchained the door. She opened it. A crack. She said, Mr. Pemberton. He said, Cordelia, may I come in? Please, it's important. She stepped aside. She watched him walk into her apartment. She watched his eyes take it in. The water stain on the ceiling, the threadbare rug, the mismatched dishes drying on the rack, the yellow papers on the counter, the dollar bill on the coffee table. He stopped at the dollar bill. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her, and his face did something she had not expected. It broke, just a little, at the corners, around the eyes, the way a face breaks when a man has been holding something for too long. He said, I owe you an apology, Cordelia. She said, for what? He said, for 4 days of silence. She did not answer. She just gestured. At the armchair, the one with the spring that had popped through the seat in 2019. He sat. He sat carefully. He did not seem to mind the spring. He opened the briefcase. The metal click was loud in the cold apartment. He pulled out a stack of papers, thick, bound in 3 places, stamped with red seals. He set them on the coffee table, next to the dollar bill. He said, "What I am about to tell you, I could not tell you in that room. I could not tell you on the phone. I could not tell you for 96 hours because there were cameras in that conference room, Cordelia. Vivian's legal team installed them. They have been recording everything since the day Harrison was diagnosed." She blinked. She said, "Cameras." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because Vivian is not a grieving widow. She is a litigator's dream. She has been preparing to contest the will since the day Harrison received his diagnosis. She has been waiting for me. She has been waiting for the dollar." Cordelia sat down. The couch sagged under her. She did not feel the sag. She said, "Mr. Pemberton." He said, "August, please." She said, "August, I do not understand a single word you are saying." He smiled just a little. He said, "I know. That is why I am here. Cordelia, look at me. Your brother did not leave you a dollar." She said, "He did. It is right there." She pointed. He said, "That is not an inheritance, Cordelia." He pointed too. At the dollar. He said, "That is a receipt." She did not move. She said, "A receipt for what?" August leaned forward. He picked up the dollar bill. He turned it in his hands, the way a jeweler turns a stone, looking for the cut, looking for the weight. He said, "In corporate law, Cordelia, a contract is not binding unless there is consideration. Consideration is the legal term for something of value passing between two parties. It can be $1 million. It can be $1 billion. It can be $1. The law does not care about the amount. It only cares that something of value was exchanged." He set the dollar bill down. He said, "2 years ago, your brother came to my office. He sat in the same chair you sat in this morning. He looked at me and he said, 'August, I need to do something I do not have the time to do properly. I need to do it fast. And I need to do it in a way that my wife cannot break. Do you understand?'" Cordelia did not move. August continued. "He told me everything. The diagnosis, the prognosis, what Vivian had been doing, what she had been doing for years." Cordelia said, "What had she been doing?" August said, "Stealing." Cordelia exhaled. She had not realized she was holding her breath. August said, $12 million, wired in increments to a holding company in the Cayman Islands, over a period of 6 years. We have the wire confirmations. We have the bank statements. We have the signatures. We have everything." Cordelia said, "Why didn't Harrison divorce her?" August said, "Because she would have taken half, and because by then he was already planning something better." He reached into the briefcase again. He pulled out a smaller folder. He opened it. He laid the first page on top of the stack. The page was a corporate registration. State of Delaware. The company name was at the top. Ironwood Holdings, LLC. Date of formation, April 3rd, 2024. Sole member. Cordelia leaned in. Her name was on the page. Cordelia M. Ainsworth. In black ink, with her social security number redacted to the last 4 digits. She said, "August." He said, "Yes." She said, "I never signed this." He said, "Your brother had your power of attorney, Cordelia, since 1994. Walter signed it over to him when Walter got sick. Harrison kept it. He never returned it. You never asked for it back. He used it once for this." She said, "And what does Ironwood Holdings own?" He said, "Almost everything that matters." He flipped to the next page. A balance sheet. Numbers. She tried to focus on the numbers. The numbers swam. She caught one of them. 12.1 million. Then another. 14.7 million. Then her eyes refused to track. She said, "I think I am going to be sick." August said, "Take your time." She did not take her time. She stood up. She walked to the kitchen. She filled a glass at the tap. The water came out brown. She poured it out. She came back. She sat back down. She said, "Read it to me, please read what is on the page." He said, "Ironwood Holdings, LLC currently holds the following assets. Item 1, real property, Larkspur Hollow Estate, White Mountains, New Hampshire, 243 acres. Purchased 1989. Current appraised value 12.1 million. Mortgage zero. Item 2, precious metals, Credit Suisse gold bars, stored on premises. Total weight 412 kilograms. Current market value 14.7 million. Item 3, vintage timepieces, including a 1943 Patek Philippe perpetual calendar. Current auction estimate 2.1 million. Item 4, bearer bonds, various issuers. Face value combined 3.8 million. Item 5. He paused. He looked up. She said, "Keep going." He said, "Item 5. Cash held in escrow, 5 million exactly, for tax liabilities and operational expenses during the transition period." Cordelia said, "Transition period." August said, "From your brother's death to the moment you take control." Silence. Long silence. She said, "How much?" "All of it together." He said, $37.7 million, give or take, depending on the price of gold this morning. She said, "August." He said, "Yes." She said, "I do not understand." He left this to me, with $1 in a room in front of cameras. August said, "Cordelia, listen carefully. He did not leave it to you. He sold it to you." Her mouth opened. It did not produce a word. August said, 2 weeks before he died, your brother executed a binding corporate transfer. He sold 100% of Ironwood Holdings, LLC, to you for the sum of $1 US. That dollar was the consideration. Without that dollar, the transfer is not legal. With that dollar, the transfer is ironclad. He pointed at the dollar on the coffee table. He said, "That is the dollar." Cordelia stared at it. She stared at the wrinkles in the paper, the little tears at the corners, the faces, Washington, the pyramid, the eye. She said, "He paid me $1 to make me legally own $37 million worth of things." He said, "Yes." She said, "And the will." He said, "The will is a decoy. Everything in the will, the houses, the maritime shares, the cars. Those are the assets Vivian and her lawyers were watching. Those are the assets they prepared to litigate over. They were so busy guarding the front door, they never noticed Harrison walk out the back." She said, "And what is in the back?" He said, "You, with everything that mattered to him." She let out a sound. It was not a laugh. It was not a cry. It was the sound a kettle makes 1 second before it whistles. He waited. He let her have the sound. Then he said very quietly, "There is more, Cordelia." She said, "More." He said, "Get your coat and pack a small bag. You are not coming back to this apartment tonight." She said, "August, I cannot just." He said, "Yes, you can." She said, "The eviction, the gas, the..." He said, "Cordelia, you are a multi-millionaire as of 2 weeks ago. Those problems are not your problems anymore." She said, "I do not know how to be a multimillionaire." He said, "Nobody does the first day." She packed a small bag. She did not pack much. A change of clothes, her toothbrush, the bottle of vitamins she had been splitting in half to make last longer, a photograph of Walter from their wedding day in 1973, the Moby Dick she had been reading to Harrison, a wool scarf. She locked the apartment door. She did not look back. The black town car was idling at the curb. It was warm inside. It smelled like leather and clean wool. She had not been in a car this warm in 12 years. She started to cry. Just a little. August did not say anything. He just handed her a clean white handkerchief. She used it. The drive was 3 hours. Up the coast, past Brunswick, past Augusta, then west. into the mountains. The country turned from low scrub to thick pine. The pine turned to birch. The birch turned to road that climbed and twisted and disappeared between cliffs. Cordelia watched the trees. She thought about Harrison. She thought about Harrison at 15, on the porch in Booth Bay, reading Moby Dick, doing the voices, making her laugh until she dropped her lemonade. She thought about Harrison at 31. That was 1978. That was the year Walter had come home from work one night. Quiet, quieter than usual. And he had sat at their kitchen table. And he had said, "Della, I need to tell you something." And then he had not told her something. He had sat there, with his hands folded, and finally he had said, "Never mind. It was nothing." And he had stood up, and he had gone to bed. She had not pressed him. That was 1978, the year the savings account got smaller, the year she could not figure out why, the year Walter had started working Saturdays. She had asked him about it once. He had said just a project, for a friend. She had not asked again. Walter had been like that. Walter had been a quiet man. Walter had died 18 years later, and she had still not known. She watched the road. She thought August. "I think you are about to tell me something I do not want to know." She thought August. "Please tell me." The town car turned off the highway, onto an unpaved road, hidden behind a stand of weeping willows. The car drove on the gravel for 2 more miles, past nothing, past more nothing, past a doe with 2 fawns who looked up at the car and did not run. And then the trees opened, and Cordelia saw it. Larkspur Hollow, 3 stories, stone, old stone, the color of wet slate, 2 enormous wrought iron gates, ivy climbing the gateposts, a long sweeping driveway, a reflecting pool with no water in it for the winter. A house that looked like it had been carried here 1 stone at a time from somewhere in Scotland. She pressed her hand against the glass. She said, "Oh, Harry." August parked. He came around. He opened her door. He offered her his arm. She took it. She walked up the stone steps. He produced a heavy brass key. He unlocked the front door. He turned a panel on the wall. The foyer lit up. A crystal chandelier, 2 stories tall, casting golden light across white sheets. Most of the furniture was covered in dust cloths. Sleeping ghosts in a sleeping house. The air smelled like lemon oil, old paper, and something else. She closed her eyes. Pipe tobacco. Davidoff. Harrison's blend. A wave hit her so hard she had to grab the doorframe. August steadied her. He said, "I know." He said he spent his last good month here. He came up alone. He sat in the library. He smoked his pipe. He wrote letters, many letters. He prepared everything. She said, "Show me." He nodded. He led her through the foyer, down a long corridor, past portraits of people she did not recognize. The portraits were of strangers, old, oil, the previous owners. He led her into a library. The library was the size of her old apartment. Cherry wood paneling, floor to ceiling, shelves crammed with books, a leather wing chair next to a fireplace, a pipe rack on the mantel. She walked to the pipe rack. She picked up one of the pipes. It was warm. That was impossible, but it felt warm. She put it back. August walked to a section of shelving filled with encyclopedias. He reached behind a thick leather volume. Something clicked. The bookcase swung outward. A narrow concrete stairwell, fluorescent lights humming. He said, "Cordelia, after you." She walked down the stairs. 23 steps. The air grew cooler. At the bottom of the stairwell stood a heavy stainless steel vault door. The engraved logo of Diebold Nixdorf, the premier bank vault manufacturer in the country. August keyed in a code. He spun a chrome wheel. He heaved the door open. She stepped inside. The room was the size of her former apartment. Climate-controlled, cold, bright, and it was filled with the kind of wealth that does not look like wealth at first glance, because it is too neat, too quiet, too organized, stacked on heavy steel shelves, pyramids of gold bars, each one stamped with the Credit Suisse seal, each one the size of a hardcover book, catching the fluorescent light in soft yellow flashes, glass cases, watches, vintage, Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin, Audemars Piguet, names she did not know, names that meant nothing to her, names that meant everything to certain men, sleeves of bonds, sealed in archival plastic, stock certificates, original, Boeing, Johnson& and Johnson, Coca-Cola, names she did recognize. She walked the length of the room, slowly. Her hand trailed across the cold steel shelving. She did not pick anything up. She just walked. Like a woman walking through a cemetery she had not visited in a long time. At the far end of the room, a small wooden pedestal. On the pedestal, a velvet box the size of a paperback. And next to the box, a letter, sealed with red wax. The wax stamped with the Marwick family crest, the one their father had ordered from a stamp maker in Boston in 1958. The one Harrison had hated as a child. The one he had used on every important letter he had ever sent for the last 60 years. She walked to the pedestal. She picked up the letter. She broke the seal. She unfolded the paper. Her brother's handwriting, shaky, but his, unmistakably his. She read. She read out loud. She did not know why she read out loud, but the words wanted to be heard. My dearest Della, if you are reading this, then my last play worked. They have been fed empty promises. They have been given paper houses. The real treasure is in your hands, as it should have been from the beginning. I know I was a hard man. I know I let business consume my soul. I know I did not deserve the love and the patience you gave me at the end. I was not kind to you in the years before. I was not kind. Della, I was not kind. You came anyway. You came because Marlena called. You came because that is who you are. You have always been who you are. I have not always been who I should be. 3 years ago, I hired a private investigator. I found out what Vivian had been doing. I found out what Carter had been helping her do. I was already sick. My mind was beginning to slip. I had perhaps 1 good year of clarity left, and so I spent it on one thing only: protecting you. I took out enormous loans against the Maritime Company, against the Cape Elizabeth estate, against the summer house. The banks gave me what I asked for, because the banks did not yet know I was dying. I took the borrowed money, and I bought the assets you are looking at right now. Vivian and Carter will inherit a fortune of paper. You have inherited what is real: the dollar. The dollar I gave you in front of them was the price you paid for this house, for the gold, for the watches, for the bonds, for your future. It was the only way to do it. Della, I had to humiliate you on camera so they would never suspect, so they would walk away gloating, so they would not contest the will. I am so sorry. I am so very, very sorry. If I had been a better man, I would have found another way. I was not a better man. I was a dying man with a wife who wanted me dead and a sister who had given everything. And so I made the choices I could make. There is one more thing. In the velvet box, next to this letter. Open it. I owe you an explanation for more than this house, for more than the gold, for something else, something that happened a very long time ago, something I should have told you in 1996. I am sorry, Della. I am sorry for so much, but I am most sorry for what I let Walter do for me, and what I never had the courage to tell you. Open the box. Your brother who loved you all along, even when he did not know how to say so. Harry. Cordelia stood very still. The letter was shaking in her hand. Or her hand was shaking. She could not tell which. She set the letter down on the pedestal. She picked up the velvet box. She opened it. Inside the box, a folded piece of paper, yellowed, old. The folds soft from being opened and refolded over decades. Under the paper, a small black and white photograph. She picked up the photograph first. It was Walter, her Walter, standing in front of the old Marwick Maritime headquarters. The original building, the brick one on Commercial Street, the one they had torn down in 1992. Walter was holding a stack of papers. He was wearing his blue suit, the one she had bought him for their 5th anniversary. Standing next to him was Harrison. They were shaking hands, the date on the back of the photograph, in Harrison's handwriting, March 22nd, 1978. She set the photograph down. She picked up the folded paper. She unfolded it. It was a promissory note. She read the top line. Promissory note. She read the next line. Principal amount, $80,000. She read the next line. Borrower, Harrison A. Marwick. She read the next line. Lender, Walter J. Ainsworth. She read the next line. Collateral. The line read, primary residence of the lender, 47 Coral Lane, South Portland, Maine. She felt the room move, the cold steel, the gold, the watches, the shelves, all of it, tilted just a little. She caught the pedestal. She thought. Walter. Walter mortgaged our house in 1978 to loan Harry $80,000 to save the company. And he never told me. He never told me. He never told me. She heard August behind her. Quiet, respectful, a man who knew when not to speak. She said in a voice she did not recognize, when did Walter pay it off? August said, he didn't, Cordelia. She said, what do you mean he didn't? August said, Walter died before he could. The note was still outstanding when he passed in 1996. Harrison repaid the note to the estate, quietly, through a different attorney, so that you would not know, because Walter had asked him not to tell you. Walter had said, he said, some kindnesses are meant to stay invisible. She did not cry. She thought she would cry, but she did not. She just held the promissory note. She thought about her husband, quiet, brown-haired, hardworking Walter. Walter who had come home that night in 1978. Walter who had almost told her. Walter who had decided not to. Walter who had carried it for 18 years. She thought about the savings account that had gone empty. She thought about her husband working Saturdays. She thought about her husband eating cold leftovers because they could not afford to go out. She thought about her husband dying in a hospital bed at St. Mary's in 1996 after the heart attack. The 11 days she had sat by his bed, the conversations they had about their childhoods, about the children they had not been able to have, about what to plant in the spring garden, about Cordelia's job at the library, about everything. He had not told her, not once. In 11 days, he had taken it with him. She set the promissory note down, carefully. She turned to August. She said, why are you telling me this? Why did Harrison want me to know this? Now. August said, because 3 months after Walter died, Harrison received 27 letters from you over the course of 6 months. He was meant to throw them out. He did not throw them out. He read them, all of them, and he started to plan. She said, plan what? August said, how to repay a kindness that had been kept invisible. He looked at her, steady, kind, the way honest lawyers look at the heirs of honest men. He said, Cordelia, this house, this vault, the gold, the bonds, the watches, none of it is a gift. None of it is charity. It is a debt your brother spent 28 years preparing to pay. A debt to a man who would not let himself be thanked. He took a breath. And to a sister who deserved to be thanked. For everything else. She turned back to the pedestal. She looked at the photograph. Walter, 28 years old, holding the papers, shaking her brother's hand, smiling. The smile of a man who has just done something difficult and kind and does not want anyone to know. She touched the photograph. Then she touched the letter. Then she touched the dollar bill which she had brought with her in the pocket of her coat, the pocket where Hazel had placed the pen. She held the dollar bill. She held the photograph. She held the pen. 3 small things, she said in a very quiet voice. Walter. She said Harry. She said, I see you. And somewhere deep in the climate-controlled silence of the vault, in the soft yellow light of all that gold, she heard the kettle in her chest finally begin to whistle. Then, above them, in the world above the bookshelf, a doorbell rang, once, twice, 3 times, insistent. August looked at the security monitor mounted in the corner of the vault. A small black and white screen, connected to the cameras at the gate. His face changed. His face went from kind grief to something sharper. She said, August, who is at the gate? He said, Cordelia, we have a problem. She said, what problem? He looked at her. He said, Vivian, she found the LLC. She is at the gate with a young woman I have never seen before. Cordelia stepped closer to the screen. She squinted. Through the grainy black and white feed, 2 figures stood at the wrought iron gates. Vivian, in a black coat, black sunglasses, hair pinned back. Next to her, a girl in her mid-20s, dark hair, tall, holding a manila folder against her chest. Vivian reached up. She pressed the intercom. Her voice came through the small speaker. Cool, almost amused. She said, Cordelia, I know you are in there. Open the gate. Pause. She said, I would like to introduce you to your niece. Cordelia looked at the small black and white screen. She looked at Vivian. She looked at the girl. She thought a niece. She thought Harrison did not have a daughter. She thought Harrison would have told me. She thought Harrison did not tell me he was loaning money in 1978 either. She thought, stop. She turned to August. Open the gate, she said. August blinked. Cordelia, open it. Cordelia, I would strongly advise. August. He stopped. He looked at her, really looked at her. Something had changed in her face. In the 4 minutes since she had read the promissory note. Something old. Something she had not used in a long time. The way a woman looks who has finally stopped apologizing for the puddle on the marble. He nodded once. He pressed a button. On the screen. The wrought iron gates began to swing open. Vivian smiled. She walked through the gates as if she had built them herself. The girl followed, half a step behind, eyes down. Cordelia turned away from the monitor. She climbed the 23 concrete stairs, slowly. She did not hurry. She did not run. She climbed. The way a woman climbs who has spent 3 years carrying her dying brother to the bathroom. The way a woman climbs who has nothing left to be afraid of. At the top, the library. The bookcase swung shut behind her with a soft mechanical click. She walked through the library, through the corridor, past the portraits of strangers, to the foyer. She removed her wet coat. She hung it on the brass hook by the door. She smoothed her hair. She looked in the small mirror above the entry table. She saw a 74-year-old woman. She saw lines on the face. She saw exhaustion. She also saw something else, something she had not seen since 1996. She did not have a name for it. She did not need one. The doorbell rang. She opened the door. Vivian stood on the stone step. Black coat, black sunglasses, lipstick the color of a fresh bruise. Behind her, the girl. Vivian removed the sunglasses. She smiled. Cordelia, she said. What a beautiful little fortress. Cordelia did not smile back. Come in, she said. Vivian stepped inside. The girl stepped inside. August appeared from the corridor, silent. A man in a charcoal suit who had decided to become a wall. Cordelia gestured to the sitting room. She said, Mrs. Marwick, please have a seat. Vivian raised an eyebrow at the formality. She sat. The girl sat. The girl kept her eyes on her own hands. Cordelia did not sit. She said, would either of you like tea? Vivian said, I am not here for tea. Cordelia said, I am. I am going to make tea. She walked to the kitchen. She filled the kettle. She lit the stove. She listened to the gas hiss, to the kettle settle, to the small, ordinary sound of water beginning to warm. She thought. She thought Harrison would have made tea. She thought Maisie would have made tea. She thought Walter would have made tea. She thought, this is what we do. This is how women like me defend our houses. We boil water, we pour it into a pot, we sit down. She brought out a tray. China cups, strainer, hot pot, sugar, milk, a small plate of shortbread she had found in the pantry, stale but acceptable. She set the tray on the coffee table. She poured 3 cups. She handed one to Vivian. Vivian took it. She handed one to the girl. The girl took it. Her hands were shaking. Cordelia sat. She said, now, Mrs. Marwick, please tell me why you are in my house. Vivian smiled again. She said, your house. Cordelia said, yes. Vivian said, Cordelia, let us not pretend we both know what you have done. Cordelia said, what have I done? Vivian said, you and that lawyer, sitting there, the two of you stole my husband's estate. Cordelia took a sip of tea. It was very hot. She did not flinch. She said, Mrs. Marwick, I do not believe I have stolen anything. I purchased a corporation for $1. The transaction is on file in Delaware. My attorney has the paperwork. Vivian's lip curled. She said, cute. Cordelia said, legal. Vivian said, we will see. Cordelia said, we will. A long silence. The kettle on the stove, hissing softly, already cooling. Vivian turned to the girl. She said, Brielle, please, show Mrs. Ainsworth the file. The girl, Brielle. She finally looked up. She had brown eyes, the kind of brown that looks like wet wood. She looked exhausted. She looked younger than the 26 August had told Cordelia she was claiming. She opened the manila folder. She slid it across the coffee table. Cordelia did not pick it up. She just looked at it. Vivienne said, Cordelia, this is Brielle, 26, born in Halifax, Nova Scotia in the spring of 2000. Her mother, a young woman named Linnea Coleman, met Harrison at a maritime conference in Halifax in 1999. They had a brief affair. Linnea returned to Halifax. She did not tell Harrison she was pregnant. Brielle grew up not knowing who her father was, until her mother passed last year from cancer and left her a letter. Vivian paused for effect. She said, in the letter, Linnea identified Harrison Marwick as Brielle's biological father. Brielle had a DNA test performed. The results are in that folder. She is a Marwick Cordelia, which makes her Harrison's daughter, which makes her Harrison's heir, which means whatever you are sitting on is not yours. Cordelia looked at the girl. The girl did not look back. Cordelia said, Brielle. The girl flinched. Cordelia said, Brielle, look at me, please. Brielle looked at her. Cordelia said, how old were you when your mother died? Brielle said, last year, I was 25. Cordelia said, and how did she die? Brielle said, breast cancer. Cordelia said, did you care for her? Brielle did not answer. Cordelia said, I am only asking because I know what caring for a sick mother looks like on a young woman's face, and I know what it leaves behind. Brielle's lip trembled. She said, yes, I cared for her. Cordelia said, for how long? Brielle said, 3 years. Cordelia said, were you working? Brielle said, 2 jobs until the second year. Then I quit one of them. To be home more. Cordelia said, what kind of work? Brielle said, pharmacy technician in waitressing on weekends. Cordelia nodded. She said, your mother. Was her real name Linnea? Brielle said. Brielle did not say anything. Vivian said, Brielle, answer the question. Brielle said her name was Linnea, but... Cordelia said, but what? Brielle said, but she never knew anyone named Harrison Marwick. Vivian went very still. Cordelia said, Brielle, how much did Mrs. Marwick pay you to come here today? Brielle made a small sound, a sound like a hinge that needed oil. Vivian said sharp now, Brielle, we discussed this. Cordelia ignored Vivian. Cordelia said, $5,000? Yes. Brielle nodded, just barely. Vivian stood up. She said, Cordelia, do not put words in her mouth. Cordelia said, Mrs. Marwick, sit down. She said it the way librarians say things, quietly, without raising her voice, just enough force in the consonants to make a child remember she was in a library. Vivian sat down. Cordelia turned back to Brielle. She said, sweetheart, may I see the DNA report? Brielle pushed the folder forward. Cordelia opened it. She did not need to be a scientist to see what was in front of her. The header, Ancestry Solutions Laboratories, Toronto. The format was wrong. She had handled enough paperwork in 41 years at the library to know what a real lab report looked like. This one was missing. The QC signature on the bottom right corner, the CLIA certification number. The protocol case ID number was an obvious sequential number, not a real protocol ID, just 1, 2, 3. The font for the result line was a different font from the rest of the document. The result line had been typed in after the fact. A child could have made this. Probably one had. Cordelia closed the folder. She slid it back across the table. She said, Brielle. Brielle said, yes, ma'am. Cordelia said, what is your real last name? Brielle's eyes filled. She said, Karen. Cordelia said, and how did Mrs. Marwick find you? Brielle whispered, I cleaned her house. In Tuscany, last summer. I needed the work. Cordelia nodded. She turned to Vivian. She did not raise her voice. She said, Vivian, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. She said, I know what you stole from my brother. She said, August has the wire transfers, the bank statements, the signatures. He has been holding them for 2 years, waiting for this exact moment. Vivian's face did not move, but the corners of her mouth tightened, just slightly, as if a string had been pulled. Cordelia continued, $12 million to the Caymans, in increments, over 6 years, while my brother was being eaten alive by Alzheimer's, while I was sleeping on a day bed next to his hospital bed, while I was paying for his morphine with my pension. Vivian said, you have no proof. Cordelia said, August. August stepped forward. He set a leather folder on the coffee table. He flipped it open. He turned 3 pages, 3 wire confirmations, 3 signatures. Vivian's signatures. Vivian went very still. The girl, Brielle, looked back and forth. Cordelia said, here are your options. Vivian. She said, option 1. You and I walk into the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Maine on Monday morning with these documents. The United States Attorney will refer the matter to the Internal Revenue Service. The minimum sentence for tax evasion at this level is 5 years federal. The maximum is 10. Wire fraud adds 3 to 20, money laundering another 3 to 20. She said, option 2, You return $6.2 million to an escrow account I will designate. Within 90 days, you sign a binding agreement, drafted by August. Tonight, you do not contest the will. You do not contact me. You do not contact Carter. You do not contact anyone with the surname Marwick. Ever. For the rest of your life. You leave the state of Maine. You do not return. Cordelia took another sip of tea. It was cooler now. She said, I will give you until this cup is empty to decide. She drank, slowly. She did not look at Vivian. She watched the steam rise. Vivian looked at August. She looked at the folder. She looked at Cordelia. She said, you would not turn me in. Cordelia said, try me. Vivian said, why 6.2 million? Cordelia said, because that is what you owe minus what my brother forgave you. He documented it. He believed in mercy. I am inclined to honor his beliefs. To a point. Vivian looked at the floor. She looked at the door. She looked at Cordelia. She said, where do I sign? August produced a document. He had drafted it on the drive up. While Cordelia had been looking at the trees, while she had been thinking about Walter and his savings account. He laid it on the coffee table. He produced a pen, not Harrison's pen, a different pen. Vivian signed. She signed 3 times. She did not say goodbye. She walked to the door. She put on her sunglasses. She turned. She looked back at Brielle. She said, are you coming? Brielle did not move. Vivian shrugged. She walked out into the cold November light. She did not close the door behind her. A draft came in. Cordelia walked to the door. She closed it. She came back to the sitting room. The girl, Brielle, was crying, quietly, into her teacup. Cordelia sat down next to her. She did not put her arm around her. She just sat. The way a woman who has lost everything sits next to another woman who has not yet lost everything but has just begun to, after a long time. Brielle said, I am sorry, Mrs. Ainsworth. Cordelia said, how old were you when your father left? Brielle said, I was 11. Cordelia said, did he come back? Brielle said, no. Cordelia said, do you have anyone? Brielle said, an aunt in Quebec. We do not really speak. Cordelia thought about that. She thought about a young woman, cleaning floors in Tuscany, burying her mother in a coffin she had probably paid for in installments, being approached by an older woman in a black coat, being offered $5,000, the price of 3 months of rent, the price of a small kindness toward the only family member she had left who hated her. She thought about how many small surrenders a young woman makes. Before she becomes a Vivian, she thought about how easy it would be to say nothing, to let this girl walk out the door, to never see her again. Instead, Cordelia said, Brielle, I am going to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. Brielle nodded. Have you ever considered going into nursing? Brielle stared at her. Mrs. Ainsworth, Cordelia. Cordelia, you just tried to extort me. I know. That is not what I am asking. I am asking if you have ever considered nursing. Brielle thought. A long pause. She said yes, when I was caring for my mom. The hospice nurse she was, the only person who treated my mother like she was still a person. I thought maybe. She trailed off. Cordelia said, where did you finish high school? Brielle said, I did not finish. Cordelia said, GED. Brielle said, yes. Cordelia said, then you can apply to community college. There is a program in Portland, 2-year nursing degree, then a bridge to RN. I will pay for it. Books, tuition, living expenses. You will work part-time at a foundation I am starting. You will earn what you receive. You will not be a charity case. You will be staff. Brielle stared. Cordelia said, "Do you understand?" Brielle whispered, "Why?" Cordelia said, "Because someone did this for someone else, a long time ago, and the chain has to keep going, or none of it means anything." Brielle began to cry. Not the quiet way, the other way. The way young women cry when an old woman has just decided to see them. Cordelia waited after a while. Brielle said, "I tried to take everything from you an hour ago." Cordelia said, "Yes," Brielle said. "Why are you doing this?" Cordelia said, "Because I am 74 years old, and I am tired of small women. I am only going to surround myself with large ones. From now on, you may not be large yet, but you will be." She handed her a tissue. August Pemberton stood by the window. He was looking out at the gravel drive. He turned, he said, "Cordelia, there is one more thing. I think it is time." Cordelia said, "What time?" August said, "There is a closet behind the library. Behind another panel, I am going to open it. I do not want to open it without you." She stood up. She said to Brielle, "Stay here. Please drink your tea. There is shortbread. It is stale, but the butter is real." She followed August through the library, past a different bookcase, to a wood panel set into the wall. August pressed a hidden release. The panel swung open. Inside the closet, stacked on a shelf, a shoebox. An old shoebox. The brand was Florsheim, the kind of men's dress shoe Walter used to buy. Cordelia stepped forward. She took the shoebox down. It was light. She carried it back to the sitting room. Brielle was still on the couch. Cordelia set the box on the coffee table. She sat. She opened the box. Inside, envelopes, stacked, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Maybe 27 of them. She knew. Before she counted, she knew it would be 27. She lifted the bundle out. She set it on her lap. She untied the ribbon. She read the address on the top envelope, her own handwriting. Younger, 44 years old, heartbroken. The return address. Her old apartment on Coral Lane, the one Walter had mortgaged. The recipient address, Harrison Marwick. The estate on Cape Elizabeth. The postmark, April 4th, 1996, 6 weeks after Walter died. She had written him. She had written him because she had been alone, and he had been her older brother. And she had thought, maybe Walter dying would be the thing that broke the silence between them. He had never written back. She had written 27 letters. He had never written back to a single one. She had thought he had thrown them out. She had thought he had not read them. She had thought she did not matter to him. She held the bundle. She lifted the first envelope. It had been opened, carefully, refolded, saved. So had the second. So had the third. So had every one. He had read them all. He had read them all. He had read them all. She opened the envelope dated April 14th, 1996. She read. She read what she had written. "Harry, Walter died on the 7th. The funeral was small. I am writing to you because I do not know who else to write to. Mama is gone. Papa is gone. Walter is gone. There is only us now. We have not spoken in many years, and I do not even remember why we stopped. Walter knew. He must have known. He said something to me on the 11th day in the hospital that I did not understand. He said, Harry was always too proud to ask. But he is good. He is good, Della. Please do not let your stubbornness outlive me. Please call him." I do not understand what Walter meant, but I am writing to you anyway, because Walter asked, "If you want to write back, here is my address. If you do not want to write back, I understand. I have been a hard sister. Maybe I deserve this silence. I just wanted to tell you." The funeral was small. The dogwoods were just starting to bloom. Your sister, Della. Cordelia set the letter down. She had not remembered writing it. She had not remembered the dogwoods. She did now. She closed her eyes. She thought, Walter, you old fool, you beautiful, beautiful old fool. You tried to tell him for me. You tried to repair us. From a hospital bed. While you were dying, you tried. She opened her eyes. She picked up the next envelope, dated May 12th, 1996. She did not read this one out loud. She read it to herself. A line caught her. Harry, I figured something out today. The savings account. I think Walter loaned you money. A long time ago. I think Walter loaned you the savings account. I do not know why I think this. I just woke up and I knew it. If I am right, please do not feel guilty. Please, if I am right, then you know something good about him that I never knew. Please tell me what you know, so I can carry it too. She had not remembered writing this either. She had not remembered figuring it out. Some part of her had known, the part of her that knew Walter. She set the second letter aside. She picked up the third. The third was dated June 1st. The third had a tear stain in the upper corner. She did not need to open the third. She had figured it out. Inside her own chest. The shape of what Harrison had spent the next 28 years doing. He had read her letters. He had read the one where she had asked. And he had not written back, because he had not yet figured out how to write back. Because Marwicks did not write back. They did. They built, they bought, they engraved. They quietly purchased a Delaware corporation. They quietly stored gold in a vault under a stone house in New Hampshire. They quietly placed a young woman whose grandmother had once cared for their dying mother for free into the home of their dying brother, as a way of saying, I was a hard man, Della, but I read every word you wrote me. She set the third letter down on the stack. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. She turned to August. She said, August. He said, yes. She said, Hazel. Did you know about Hazel? He said, yes. She said, how long? He said, 5 years. Harrison asked me to find her. We found her in Atlanta. She was 24, working in a hospital, behind on her loans. He paid them off, anonymously. He set up a memorial foundation in her grandmother's name. He used the foundation to fund her nursing degree. 2 years ago, he instructed the foundation to place her on his case. He never met her. He never spoke to her. The foundation managed everything. Cordelia said, who else? August said, 8 others, sons and daughters of people who had helped him or your parents at various points. He spent the last 12 years of his life tracking them down. He paid for educations, anonymously. He never took credit. He did not want them to feel they owed him anything. He only wanted them to know that someone somewhere had seen the kindness of their grandparents and had carried it forward. Cordelia said, who was Eunice? August said, Eunice Quincy, Hazel's grandmother. She was a private duty nurse. She worked in Portland in the 1960s. When your mother Maisie was dying, your parents had run out of money. The Marwick name was old, but the cash was gone by then. Your father could not afford a night nurse. Eunice came to the house. She came for free, 6 nights a week, for 7 weeks. She held Maisie's hand when your father could not bear to. She was the only nurse in Portland who would do that for a family that could not pay. She was a black woman in a white city in 1965. She did it anyway, because that was the kind of woman she was. Cordelia closed her eyes. She did not remember Eunice Quincy. She had been 13. She had been too young to know the women who carried her mother through the worst of it. But Harrison had been 18. Harrison had remembered. Harrison had remembered for 61 years. She said, why did he not tell me any of this? August said, he was a man, Cordelia, of his generation. He was a Marwick. He did not have the words. He had the will. He had the resources. He did not have the words. She said, I would have come back, August, years ago, if he had asked. He said, I know. He knew too. Toward the end, he used to say it, in the lucid hours. She said, Say what? August said, he used to say, Della was always the brave one. I was the rich one. She made a sound. Not a laugh, not a sob. Some animal in between. Brielle on the couch reached out and touched Cordelia's hand with one finger, like a child. Cordelia turned her hand over. She squeezed. She did not let go. 3 months later, the state of Maine, in cooperation with the federal district attorney for the District of Connecticut, had moved against Vivian Marwick. She had refused the deal Cordelia had offered. She had hired the wrong lawyer. The wrong lawyer had advised her to fight. The fight had lasted 9 weeks. Vivian Marwick was now in federal custody in Danbury, Connecticut, awaiting trial. Her assets in Tuscany had been frozen. Her assets in the Caymans had been frozen. The 44-year-old former model who had walked into a New England conference room in November wearing Chanel was by the first week of February wearing standard-issue federal prison khakis. Carter Davenport had taken the deal. He had liquidated his accounts. He had cooperated. He had testified. He had been spared prison. He had asked his aunt for a job. His aunt had said, "You will work at the foundation. You will earn no salary for the first year. You will live in the small staff apartment over the office. You will pay your own grocery bill. You will work the phones. You will learn how to apologize. With actions. The way your uncle learned." "Too late," Carter had said. "Yes, ma'am." A small storefront on Congress Street, Portland. A black sign, gold letters. The Quiet Hands Foundation. Founded in memory of Eunice Quincy, Walter J. Ainsworth, and Harrison A. Marwick. For the unseen women who carry the dying. Inside the storefront, light, warm, wood floors, a small reception desk. Hazel Quincy at the desk, now 30 years old, executive director, wearing a wool blazer Cordelia had bought her at LL Bean the week before. Hazel was reviewing a grant application from a woman in Bangor, 68 years old, caring for her husband with Parkinson's, behind on the heating bill. Hazel was approving the grant, $3,000, direct deposit. By Friday, across the room, Brielle Caron, sorting mail. She was wearing scrubs because she had a clinical rotation in an hour. She was humming a hymn one Hazel's grandmother used to sing. Hazel had taught it to her. In the back office, Carter Davenport, 32, thinner than he had been in November, his hair shorter, his clothes plainer, a pair of reading glasses on his nose. He was on the phone. He was speaking to a caregiver in Aroostook County, a woman who had not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in 11 months. He was telling her that the foundation would send a respite nurse for 1 week, starting Monday, free of charge. The woman on the other end of the line had been crying for the last 6 minutes. Carter had been listening. He had been listening properly for the first time in his life. He was getting better at the phones. In the corner of the storefront, a framed photograph, a young man and an older man, shaking hands in front of the old Marwick Maritime Building. Brick, Commercial Street, Portland, March 22nd, 1978. Walter Ainsworth, 28. Blue suit, Harrison Marwick, 31. Holding a promissory note, both of them, smiling. The kind of smile that says, "We just did something, and we will never speak of it." Below the photograph, a small brass plaque. Some kindnesses are meant to stay invisible until the woman who deserved to see them finally does. Cordelia stood in the doorway, a deep gray cashmere coat, bought by Hazel, who had insisted. She watched the three of them, the young black woman approving the grant, the young white woman sorting the mail, the young man learning finally how to listen. She thought about the chain, Eunice Quincy in 1965, a black nurse, sitting beside a dying white woman who could not pay her. Walter Ainsworth in 1978, a young accountant, mortgaging the only house he and his wife had ever owned, to save the company of a brother-in-law he barely knew, and telling no one. Harrison Marwick, over the next 48 years, quietly, patiently, hunting down the descendants of every person who had ever shown his family an unrepaid kindness, paying for their educations, their loans, their licenses, their second chances, never asking for thanks, never wanting thanks. And now, Della, a retired librarian, 74 years old, standing in a doorway, watching three young people carry the same chain forward. She felt something settle in her chest, a quiet thing, a whistling kettle that had finally come to rest. She walked out onto Congress Street. Snow was falling, the light, dry kind, the kind that does not soak through. She did not need an umbrella. She walked one block. She passed a young woman pushing a stroller. The woman with the stroller looked at her. This time, the young mother smiled. Cordelia smiled back. April, Larkspur Hollow. The dogwoods were just starting to bloom. Cordelia sat on the stone terrace, a wool blanket across her knees, across the lake, mist rising off the water, the mountains still capped with old snow. On the small wrought iron table beside her, a glass of black tea with honey, a worn copy of Moby Dick. Open to chapter 42, a small framed object, a $1 bill, behind glass, behind a brass mat, engraved on the mat in tiny letters. The exact value of things, next to the dollar. Walter's photograph, next to the photograph. Harrison's pen, refilled, working. She picked up the pen. She opened a small leather notebook on her lap. She began to write. Her handwriting was old now, the lines a little shakier than they used to be. But the letters were strong. She wrote, "To my brother Harry, whom I forgive, even though he did not ask. Because forgiveness is not something you give to people who deserve it. Forgiveness is something you give to yourself, so you do not have to carry rocks the rest of the way up the mountain. I have put the rocks down, Harry. All of them. The years, the dollar, the cameras, all of it. I see what you did. I see how long it took you to do it. I see the cost. I am not angry anymore. I am only grateful that you tried, in the only language a man like you could speak." She paused. She turned the page. She wrote, "To my husband Walter, whom I see now. I see what you did. I see why you did not tell me. I disagree gently with your choice. I would have wanted to know, but you were a good man, the very best of men. And I loved you, and I love you still. And if there is anywhere after this life where you and I will meet again, I will tell you, in person, that I always knew you were good, even when I did not know what you had done." She paused again. She turned the page. She wrote, "To the women, you, the reader, if you are reading this, and you are tired, and you are old, and you have spent your life caring for someone who never quite saw what you were doing. I see you. You are not small. You are not invisible. You are the foundation that hard men build their empires on. Without you, there is no empire. Without you, there is only stone and gold and paper and the wind. The wind does not love anyone, but you do. And that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything." She closed the notebook. She set the pen down. She picked up the tea. She drank. The wind came across the lake. It rustled the dogwoods. It did not take anything with it. It only passed through. The way wind does, the way kindness does, the way time does, the way invisible things do. She set the cup down. She closed her eyes. She breathed. And somewhere far away, or maybe somewhere very close, Her brother and her husband watched her finally sit down in the chair that had been waiting for her all along.